Hello, this is Pastor Rick, and I will welcome you to the Sunday Forum for this Sunday, June 30th, where we continue our focus on the 7 signs in John's Gospel. Once again, we are going to highlight Beatrice as she summarizes all the things she's learning about the Gospel of John and these 7 signs in her course at Southern Seminary. We reviewed the first 4 signs of the Gospel of John, and this week it'll be the last 3, which end where Jesus then raises Lazarus from the dead. He gives us victory over death. And so join us now for this important discussion on the Gospel of John as Beatrice leads us into the last 3 of the signs.
Welcome to Gospel Talks with me, intern Pastor Beatrice D'Angelo. Let's journey through the 7 signs of Christ's glory in the Gospel of John. This is episode 5, Jesus walking on water. This is the great sign that removes our fear. Who has not felt the fear that Christ might not show up? But listen, as he calms our fear, do you think he forgot? Does it seem too long? He comes running or walking to you. Is this 5th sign where Jesus quells the fears of his disciples with a single word. It is I. At the end of our 4th sign, when Jesus had fed the 5,000 with bread and fish, and plenty was left over, plerothoria, full assurance. The crowd wanted to make Jesus into the prophet who is coming into the world by force. But Jesus is a giver, not a judge. He provides. He does not wait for you to give something to him. So, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself, it says. From there, he did not return to the people he had fed. And the disciples, not knowing where to go or what to do without their leader, they went down to the sea in ships, just as a famous psalm had prophesied. Hear this. Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. Psalm 107. And did the disciples ever see wondrous works? Remember, we call the Gospel of John a rogue or maverick gospel. One of the reasons is that it has so many different stories than the other Gospels. And in this particular case, John tells the story of Jesus walking on the water differently than Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the synoptic Gospels. At the very end of the Gospel of John, when Jesus had been betrayed and put on the cross, and then on the 3rd day rose from the dead, what did Jesus do? He did not disappear into heaven. He came to them. And what did Jesus do when he found the fearful disciples cowering behind a closed door? He broke in, declared Shalom, Hesed, mercy, and then forgave them their sin. Just as Jesus will give this forgiveness at the end, he prepares the disciples for this in this 5th sign in their little boat. The boat was small in the big Capernaum Sea. It had become dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. They were alone and afraid. Jesus had not communicated with them for days. The sea was rough. They rowed and tried to get themselves to shore, when suddenly they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat. But instead of being glad, they were frightened. They didn't know who he was or what he would say, even after all these days spent with Jesus. So Jesus walked right up to them and said the words he would later repeat. It is I, ego eimi. The same words God had said to Moses at the burning bush. I am. It is the same as when Jesus tells the disciples that he is the good shepherd. And what do his sheep do? Nothing. They are free-range sheep. The sign of this walking on the sea is not really about walking on the sea. That is not the miracle. There is even a lizard here in Florida that is called the Jesus lizard because it walks on the water just like Jesus did. But there is something the lizard cannot do. He cannot talk and cannot say those beautiful words, peace be with you. I am. Don't be afraid. The fifth sign is the sign that Jesus says the words only God can say. And he says it to the frightened disciples and to you, to give them and you eternal shalom or peace. I am he. I have come to take away your fear and give you comfort forever. Welcome to Gospel Talks with me, intern pastor Beatrice D'Angelo. This is episode 6. Today we continue our journey through the 7 signs of the gospel with the 6th sign, the healing of the blind man. This sign is the great sign that gives faith eyes to see all. Hold on tight and learn how Christ gives faith eyes to see all that he has given you. The 6th sign occurred just after Jesus had proclaimed that he was the light of the world in John 8:12. How dare Jesus say such things in the temple and of himself? So it was that the 6th sign was going to be the bright, glowing example of the way Jesus chooses his own by spitting on mud and anointing the man's eyes with this spit mud, it says in John 9. And then washing in the great pool of Siloam, which means sent. Then the blind man went to the pool, washed, and came back seeing, it says. As the man later said, can a man who is a sinner do such signs? Talking about Jesus in John 9. Just after this event, some of the divided groups of Jews wanted to pick up stones and kill Jesus, just as Deuteronomy 13 had demanded that they do to blasphemers. But Jesus hid himself, it says, and went out of the temple, and immediately he passed by and saw a blind man from birth, it says. With this man, Jesus was going to elect his own before his own disciples' eyes. But the great shock is that Jesus elects his own entirely apart from the law. That is the 6th sign. This sign also tells us what sin really is. When you use the law to find sin or shine a light on sin, what does it find? The disciples asked, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? The law looks for the cause in something the person did, or blames the parents for some failure to fulfill the law. But the gospel looks at sin differently than blame or guilt or fault. But in the end, it doesn't matter who is to blame, because a sinner can't change it. He says, I'm stuck in this place forever, having to beg beside the temple that is supposed to be God's place, and where I could plead to him for help. But on this great day, Jesus says, it was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be made manifest in him. God manifests himself as freedom. The law always accuses, as the disciples did with this man. But what does the gospel do? It works the work of him who sent him, it says. That means he is going to manifest himself in this man. Jesus makes faith where there was none. And he does it by putting his word, I am the light, into the dark mud, by spitting in it, then applying it to the man's eyes, the very organs that need light to see. Then he has the man wash in the pool of Siloam. Pool of Siloam had, by Christ's day, long been tied to the prophet Isaiah. The story was that the fountain is called sent because God sent its waters to quench the thirst of Isaiah, while Isaiah was being martyred in the king's garden near this pool. This is the same garden that later figures in Judas's betrayal of Jesus. So Isaiah's tomb is found above the pool to this day. This is what we call sacrament, or giving a man faith through the created things that God uses for faith. Jesus has come to claim his own by setting the blind free from sin. Jesus does not use the law to do this. He uses his own spit, his own mud, his own word, and the man is set free. Those who want to be righteous by the law are angry. But neither Jew nor Gentile will enter God's kingdom by means of the law. All will come as blind, lame, and poor, who are lifted out of their misery by Jesus alone. Giving his word in a sacrament to the sinners who really need it. No wonder that by the end of John 9, the blind man confesses his true faith to Jesus alone, and not only as Rabbi or Prophet or Messiah or Son of Man, but as Lord, I believe, it says. Those are the steps to freedom. And when the blind man is given them, his faith sees what the eyes cannot. He now sees with faith eyes that are much better than the failing eyes he had been born with. And now we have our sixth sign, a light to the nations. That means you. Welcome Welcome to Gospel Talks with me, Intern Pastor Beatrice D'Angelo. This is episode 7. The seventh and final sign is the raising of Lazarus. Even death cannot separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ. The book of signs that John is using and writing as the first part of the Gospel of John ends in the most dramatic and amazing of the signs, raising Lazarus from the grave itself with the simple word, "Come out." It is a sign, and in that way points to the real thing to come, which is Jesus' own death and resurrection, the story of John's second book. When people think only according to the law, they usually think of sin as a kind of dirt that has to be cleaned off. But Jesus has not come to earth from heaven above in order to restore us. Jesus is doing something much bigger, much more maverick and rogue. He does not want to repair us. He wants to raise us from the dead. This is what Isaiah 43 meant by God doing a new thing that has never been seen or done before. If we think of sin as disobeying the law, then the answer to sin is to stop disobeying and beginning to obey. If that is all that is needed for you, then God could send a new Moses. What is our problem then? If Jesus is God's own Son, the Word, who has come down in the flesh. Lazarus is a sign of our biggest final problem. We die. How can we ever overcome that? Who has a remedy for death? No medical doctors, no lawyers, no politicians even, not even theologians or philosophers. Only Christ has a way, the way, to overcome death. It is called resurrection and is why we call Jesus Mr. Resurrection. The story goes like this. Now, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. We learn two things. First, Lazarus was only ill and needed a friend or a doctor. The second is that this man was a friend of Jesus and the brother of Mary. And it was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. That is why it is so frustrating to the sisters that Jesus did what he did. It says, now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Is that love? Jesus waited 2 days. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died. What kind of a friend is that? It is no friend. But Jesus is much more than a friend. When Martha, the hard-working sister, saw Jesus coming, she ran out and scolded him. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But she also was a woman of faith and said, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. What did that mean? What would Jesus say now that God would give him? Resurrection from the dead. But Martha said that she knew there would be resurrection, but she thought it would be something that would come at some future day when everyone would be raised and judged before God. Then Jesus corrected her. There is no waiting with Jesus. There is no final judgment. Jesus is the judge, and he is not judging against Lazarus. Jesus is judging against death itself. He is just about to put death to death. Who can do that? Not waiting until the last day or some future resurrection time someday soon. But Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in him, though he die, yet shall live, it says. That is not a rule to follow. It is a promise to believe. So, Jesus proceeded to do what he came for. He said, Where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Then, in order to show us the true sign, Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, See how he loved him. They thought the real Jesus was revealing his feelings. Why cry now? He's dead and no one can help now. But Jesus wasn't crying because he felt sorry for his friend. He cried because Jesus hates death. He can't stand it, especially when it takes his friend Lazarus or tries to take your life from you. So, Jesus went to work as God, who is greater than death. He said, Take away the stone. Martha cried, But Lord, by this time he stinketh. But what did Jesus care about the smell of death? He conquers all, even bad odor. He has no fear. Jesus gave thanks to his Father, then went to work and cried out with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out! Such a simple little word, yet it is not a commandment that Lazarus must do. He is dead after all. It is a promise. And do you know what happened then? Lazarus, the man who had died, came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips, and his face wrapped with cloth. Jesus said to them, Unbind him and let him go, it says. The gospel is Jesus' word that defeats death. When he raises the dead with it, they are free. Unbind him, let him go. Lazarus is now a free sheep, a raised man, and you can't be more free than to have death behind you. No more death can hold you back. Why did Jesus come as Mr. Resurrection? So that he could stand outside your tomb, outside of the law that has tried to keep you dead and bound, and say to you, come out. And what do you suppose you will do when he tells you that? Will you stay in fear, afraid, in darkness and death? You will do just as Lazarus did. Stand up and come out, unbound and free. This final sign is the seventh sign, the perfect and ultimate sign of all, that Jesus defeats death so that you will no longer be dead, but live freely with no fear of death ever again. We have now gone together on this journey through the wedding banquet of Christ, the assurance that we will live, the freedom from the law, the offense of the gospel, the end of all fear, the eyes of faith, and the assurance that Christ is stronger than death. From here, John's gospel takes the journey to the cross. Jesus' freedom from the tomb and the giving of the keys to the kingdom that forgives on earth as God does in heaven. Let us now give thanks that Christ has made his journey to us so that we can go with him into the great marriage banquet that has no end. Hand in hand, mano a mano, arm in arm, brazo a brazo, as Christ's own chosen beloved who have been made new to enter his kingdom forever. Amen.